folks. Welcome. My name is Stephanie, and I work with Climbing the Seven Summits. I'm going to be walking you through lots of different things today, along with Dallas and Dani, who are joining me. So, folks, as you know, we're here to talk about Denali today. So, Denali, the Great One, it sits in Alaska, and it sits along a 600-mile-long range called the Alaska Range. It rises over 20,000 feet tall, and it's the tallest peak in North America, and it is one of the seven summits. There are, 18,000 feet, that's 4,000 meters of vertical relief from the base of the summit. This thing is huge. It has earned the name the Great One. It's wild, it's remote, it's notorious with weather, bad weather, not just good weather, and it sits just 200 miles south of the Arctic Circle. So it is a fantastic peak if you're really looking to test your systems and work really hard out there. It's a truly self-supported climb. Dallas and Dani are going to be talking a lot about that today. You build camps, you build walls, you are pulling a sled. It demands grit, preparation, and a lot of patience and a lot of teamwork out there. So, like I said, today we're going to be talking about what it's like to really take on and climb Denali and also prepare for Denali, all the way from flying in on that ski plane to actually being in the Alaska Range itself with its endless daylight in the North American summer. So let's jump on into our agenda and take a peek at that. So we'll be going over fast facts, talking about what makes Denali so unique and the challenges that presents them. And then we'll talk about progression climbing to get yourself ready for Denali. And then we're going to jump into our actual expedition and our route and itinerary information. And then we're going to wrap things up with training, how to prepare for it, both physically and mentally, and then talk gear, talk our philosophy at Climbing the Seven Summits, and of course, share our contact. We'll wrap things up with final thoughts from Dallas and Dani. So with no further ado, you all are here to learn from Dallas and Dani. So I want to go ahead and jump into their introductions. Folks, we have our 2025 Denali guide here with us today. He will also be guiding in 2026 on Denali with our teams as well. So with no further ado, I want to introduce you all to Dallas Glass. He is here from Seattle. And Dallas, feel free to go ahead.
Yeah. Hey, crew. Glad to be with you today. I was thinking about what to say here, trying to sum up a whole lifetime of climbing. I started climbing 30 years ago. I did my first climbing in Alaska back in 2006, and I've been climbing there almost every year ever since. I really love going up there. It's a very special place in my heart. I was fortunate enough to live up in the Fairbanks area for a handful of years. And so getting to go climb and guide up there is still one of my absolute favorite places. That's why I go back year after year with Climbing the Seven Summits.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that intro. We are stoked to have you here, and your expertise is beyond. Folks, he will really be taking us through kind of section by section on the mountain and what to expect as you make your way to the summit. And then we have Dani here today, Dani Kluberton. She is joining us as Climbing the Seven Summits Expedition Manager. Many of you I know have chatted with Dani and worked with Dani. She oversees our Denali expedition, and she helps onboard all of you to the process and what we do. She also has a really deep connection with the Alaska Range, with Talkeetna, and things like that. So Dani, go ahead and dive on in.
Yeah, as Stephanie said, I'm the expedition manager here at Climbing the Seven Summits, coming up on 2 years with them. I've been working in operations, logistic management with the Seven Summits now for over 10 years. I'm also a climber and mountaineer myself, although these days I find myself climbing more sunny rocks and less snowy peaks. I did used to live up in Alaska in Talkeetna, and I specifically worked for Denali seasons up there. And as Stephanie said, Talkeetna holds a special place in my heart. That's where my husband and I got married almost 7 years ago now. So I love Talkeetna, the town, the culture, and the whole Denali Range. It's absolutely stunning.
Awesome, Dani. Thank you for that. So we're going to go ahead and jump right into it. Denali is a really unique mountain, as I've already alluded to. There are some really interesting things going on out there. So Dani's going to cover a couple of these Denali fast facts. These are designed just to make sure everyone is on the same page. And we have a couple of really broad maps here. We're, of course, going to dive in and look at the actual route itself on maps. But Dani, let's go ahead and jump into it and talk through these fast facts.
So as we all know, Denali is the tallest mountain here in North America, making it one of the seven summits. It stands at 6,190 meters, or 20,310 feet tall. Denali's kind of unique. It's got a northern latitude of 63 degrees north, which impacts a whole lot of things on the mountain, making it different than other mountains. And we'll talk more about that as we get into things today. But when you're on Denali in the summer, there's daylight almost 24/7 while you're up there. There's crazy weather from beautiful sunny days to insane day, week, let's hope not, long storms while you're up there. And because of that, and like I said, we'll talk more about this later, it's got a lower barometric pressure and therefore has a greater effective altitude than mountains at a similar height elsewhere in the world. So kind of a crazy mountain from where it's sitting at that point. As Stephanie said earlier, Denali's located in the heart of the 600-mile-long Alaska range. It's just 240 miles north of Anchorage, although it's not as easy to get to as it sounds. We work with a air taxi service called Talkeetna Air Taxi, and their slogan is you can walk a week or fly an hour to get into Denali. You can't drive to base camp. You can walk there, but it might take you a week or more, or you can just hop that flight and fly an hour in from Talkeetna there. Denali is in Denali National Park, which was established on February 26, 1917 by President Woodrow Wilson. And Denali is the Athabasc word meaning the great one. So the great mountain up in that range there.
Perfect. One fact I read earlier that Alaska is double the size of Texas. It is big up there when we're talking Denali, and you're kind of smack in the lower part of that state up there. And that 600-mile range is also massive. We're talking really big places, really big spaces. So let's go ahead and jump into talking about what makes climbing on Denali so unique, just to help set the stage. So Dallas, I want to jump in with you a little bit and have you share a little bit about, especially from the guide perspective, what is making Denali so unique?
I mean, there's so many things that stand out about Denali that make this place a unique and fun and interesting mountain to climb. For anybody who's been on a peak with me, or maybe we've chatted about climbing or mountaineering, like one of my favorite themes is teamwork. I really believe there is no better team sport than mountaineering, but Denali seems to accentuate that to a whole nother level because it's so remote, because it's so far up there, because it doesn't have all the support and logistics that we have on many other peaks around the world. We are really dependent on our teammates. And it means that the climbers and the guides, we're relying on each other. We're relying on the climber next to us. And to some extent, we're even reliant a little bit on some of the other teams on the mountain. We work really, really closely together. And this goes from everything from how we carry loads to when we get into camp and we have to set up camp and we have to work together to make sure we have shelter, to all the way down to just daily chores around our campsites to make sure that we can exist in this very remote, very harsh environment. So any mountain, when we get to the summit, it's a big team effort. But for Denali, it is absolutely the biggest team effort because it is taking every last one of us to get through every step. Nobody gets to the top of this thing on their own. One of my favorite stories from Denali was not this past summer, but summer before. When we hit the summit, my entire team, they greeted each other with high fives, but the very first thing they did was actually they shared this huge group hug. And I thought that was such an amazing example of how big of a team effort they recognized climbing Denali really is.
Oh, Dallas, we love that. Here at CTSS, teamwork is truly one of our core philosophies, core ideas. We feel like that it just brings so much to the table when you are able to work as a team and do so with kindness and respect, and you can go farther together. It's really true. But I'm going to let Dani chat here and talk about what, from her perspective, she thinks is really unique about Denali.
So kind of from my perspective, sitting in the office here, if you've talked to me about Denali, I'm sure that you've heard me say this. I love Denali for the fact that it's so remote. It's in the middle of this insane climbing range in, the north. And it's unlike every other mountain out there. It doesn't have porters and Sherpas like we do on Everest. There's no mules that we have on Aconcagua. There isn't Starlink at every camp. You're kind of out there. You're carrying all of your own gear, all of your own food, all of your own weight. Nobody else is helping you. And I think that also brings a true sense of accomplishment for everybody who can say that they've climbed Denali, because you've really, truly climbed it yourself as a part of your team, like Dallas was talking about.
think you're getting the idea. It's wild out there. It's remote, and you don't have a lot of those comforts that you might find, especially in the Himalayas, in Ecuador, things like that. Nothing wrong with those. We love them. We love climbing Lobuche, Manaslu. We love Cotopaxi, but there's something unique in the sense of Denali because you are solo out there, solo with your team and other teams, but no porters, no mules. It takes a while to get outside help as well. One question I want to ask that I think makes Denali really unique is we're looking at this picture right here. This picture is a little rough. Dallas, I think this is from your group last year. And it actually was a question that came in from one of the registrants, and it was asking about people being caught in storms for days. Do you wait for days for the weather to clear? How do you stay focused? That was the question. So Dallas, do you mind talking a little bit about that unique weather kind of storm facet of Denali?
Absolutely. So the weather is a big challenge up on Denali. It's like a remote, cold, high mountain like we've been talking about. And I think a lot of the photos you see are beautiful sunny days. And actually, we were requested as guides to take more bad weather photos. So that's where this one came in. When these storms roll in, Denali is such a challenging mountain that it does oftentimes shut down a lot of our climbing, particularly on the upper mountain. And I'll kind of break the mountain down into lower mountain and upper mountain a little later. But particularly on the upper mountain, we just don't have the ability to continue to move in really bad weather. And we deal with that in several ways. Number one, we need to be prepared for that going in mentally. Because that means we've got to make sure that we're ready to have some downtime. It means we need to maybe have some other ways to keep ourselves entertained other than counting squares on the tent above our heads. It also means we built in contingency days. When we talk about the itinerary, you're going to hear us talk about those contingency days. Yes, we can get some really bad weather on this mountain. There are particularly sections of it that are really, really stormy. It is the number one reason that teams don't summit is bad weather. And so it has about a 50% success rate. And that's a big challenge because a lot of it is bad weather. Last year, we actually spent 14 days at the 14,000 foot camp because of weather. Now, it was not raging snowstorm every day, but it was definitely enough. The winds were blowing. The conditions were such that we could not continue to climb. That said, every time I'd come out of the kitchen tent, my crew was making snowmen, making snow angels. They were digging tent platforms for other climbers that were coming into camp. They absolutely wore out what we call the boulevard, the main trail that runs through camp. And so even though you're up there in really bad weather, we're still having a lot of fun. And I was really impressed with how much that crew really enjoyed where they were, despite the fact that the weather was keeping us stationary.
Awesome. I know, Dallas, we were getting messages from you. We were doing updates, showing pictures of snowmen you were building. I know I saw other teams on there were had a fake DJ setup, and there was a lot of goofiness in the right way. And you will also see, folks, when we talk about training, we're going to talk about the mentality needed to get in there. There's a physical side and there's a mental side. Because if you're in that tent for 14 days, you're getting out of it still, but it's a lot on you, and it's a lot on your head up here. So we've really set the stage that Denali presents a really unique challenge. And so I'm going to be turning this over in just a moment to Dallas once again to walk us through what we dubbed the Denali challenge. But as you've heard, lots of different things are making this mountain unlike other 7 summits and definitely unlike other peaks across North America and in the entire world. So Dallas, I know we've mentioned quite a few of these already, but go ahead, walk us through the Denali challenge, and then I'm going to follow up with a link at the end.
Sure. So a lot of folks will argue that Denali is actually the hardest of the 7 summits. And I think there's a legitimate case to be made there. I think what's really true, more that which one's the hardest, but that each of the 7 summits presents a unique and different set of challenges. And Denali, in a lot of ways, is more challenging than even Everest. Sure, it's lower, but it presents a totally different set of things that you're going to have to be ready to tackle. Number one, we can be on the mountain for over 20 days. Now, sure, maybe you're on a big Himalaya peak for longer than that, but you're coming back to this base camp where things are much cushier. We have cooks and all these things. On Denali, we're out there. And as Stephanie mentioned earlier, we're carrying all of our food and all of the fuel that we need to melt snow for water for those 20 plus days. And we're doing it all. So there's no, like Dani mentioned, there's no porters, there's no yaks, there's no pre-established camp. We are completely self-supported. Whatever we fly onto that glacier with, That's all we have for the duration of the entire climb. There's no real connections with the outside world. We have things like satellite texting and stuff now through Garmin's, or even some of our phones will do that, and that's great. But even then, communication with the outside is pretty wilderness. We consider this a wilderness climb, and the Park Service and the guide services maintain that same ethos through our climbing, that we're really looking at it as we are self-supported. We need to be self-reliant while we're out there. As we just talked about with those like long-term storms, the weather runs the mountain. We don't get a lot of say in that. And so when the weather's good, we move. And when it's not, we have to stay put. And that means that we don't have this great schedule that we can just tell you exactly what's going to happen tomorrow. We have to be ready to be fluid and dynamic, to adjust to whatever Mother Nature is giving us. And sometimes we even flip the whole thing on its head. We may wind up traveling at night to beat the heat rather than traveling in the daytime. So especially on the lower mountain, we typically will flip into what we call a night schedule. And these kind of things really do change the overall how the mountain feels as we're traveling. But that also is what makes it super fun, because it's not just like every other mountain that we've been on. We're carrying those heavy loads. We're in this really remote place. And because of that, it brings a whole nother level of satisfaction. Also necessitates a whole nother level of preparedness.
Awesome. So folks, actually, Dani, Dallas, and I actually put our heads together before this webinar, and we produced what is called the Denali readiness test. We were thinking about this idea of it being a challenge and it being a whole kind of list of things that you need to focus in on, whether it's the training, whether it's the gear and being, really cold outside, and the mental capacity you need to have, the progression you need to do. So we came up with a Denali readiness test, but that's just a great way to get a sense of if you're Denali ready based on a handful of criteria. That is not the only criteria. There are still ebbs and flows to it. If you don't get a score that you think you should get and you think you're Denali ready, by all means, you're probably still Denali ready if there's a couple other pieces on there. But you can take that, have a look at it, have some fun with it. It's just meant to be a lighthearted way to assess this idea of Denali being a really big challenge, being a really unique mountain, and it having some really unique challenges. So let's jump into actually talking about how to get ready for Denali, because I think that makes a really big difference in what you all are doing right now and how you're preparing for it. Dani is the queen of progressions at CTSS. She is going to talk us through what it looks like to progress and get ready for Denali.
So I've talked to many of you about progressions. How do I get ready for Denali? How do I get ready for Everest? How do I get ready for, X mountain? And one thing that I like to start off with saying is that progressions are unique to every single climber. What works for Bob might not work as well for Emily. And so here at CTSS, we're tailoring our progression advice to each climber, to their backgrounds, to the money that they have, to the time off they have, to all of their other requirements and things that take their time in life. So there's not a one-size-fits-all approach here, but we do kind of look at 4 key areas when we're evaluating climbers for Denali. I'll talk about those kind of first, and then I'll jump into like a sample progression that we might use for a climber. So kind of the first checkbox that we're looking for before you climb Denali is experience at altitude. We want to know that you've been to some higher elevations before, whether that's Aconcagua, Everest Base Camp, Kilimanjaro. We want to know that you've been up there and that you generally felt and did okay. Kind of like I talked about before, because of where Denali is on the earth at that high latitude, you feel the effects of altitude way more than you would at that same elevation, say down in Ecuador. That's kind of it, really simplified. The elevation, just you feel the effects greater. So we want to know that you've been to elevations before and that you felt good, so that we can, hopefully know that you will feel semi-good or hope to feel good when you're up on Denali. So that's kind of the first box that we're looking for, is experience at altitude. The second tick box that I'm looking for is that you have the technical skills for Denali. Now, when I say technical skills, I'm not necessarily just talking about crevasse rescue. Technical skills gets into a whole bunch of different skills while climbing. And I would say one of the biggest skills that you need to have for Denali is time on snow, moving efficiently and effectively in your crampons. Before you're on Dallas's Denali team, he wants to know that you've spent a lot of time on snow using your crampons, walking up steep slopes, down steep slopes, across steep slopes, across icy slopes, all of the above. So that way your skills are really dialed in. And by the time you get to Denali, You're not focusing on, oh my gosh, this is really steep. How am I going to place my feet? Instead, you're able to focus, on the rope team, on your teammates, on taking care of yourself. And all of that footwork is kind of second nature. Of course, crevasse rescue and other technical training is also important. Knowing how to ascend a fixed line, like when we move out of 14K camp, is also essential. But kind of really what we focus on is that time on snow and time in crampons. So that's our second checkbox, is technical skills. Kind of the third thing that we're looking for before you join us on Denali is having excellent fitness and self-care. Denali's a long expedition. 20 plus days on the mountain is a lot of time to be without a shower, without a heated tent, without a stove that you can just hit the buttons and turn on and boom, your food comes out ready. We need to know that you can take care of yourself, not only on those first couple days when you're feeling good, but when you've been sitting at 14K camp for 14 days and it's just tough. When you're rolling into high camp after coming up the 16K ridge, we want to know that you still have the ability, when you're very tired, to shovel that tent platform, set up your tent, take off your boots, get into dry socks, making sure you're well hydrated, making sure you're feeding yourself, whether you feel like eating or not. So having all of that self-care dialed in, as well as that fitness in order to have the energy to take care of yourself and your teammates, goes a long way on Denali. You want to have everything dialed in so that you can be on autopilot on all of those things and just enjoying the experience at hand. So that's our third box. Our fourth and final box that we're looking for to check here is having a team player mentality. Dallas talked a lot about this. One of the coolest things about Denali is like the teams that we're able to build and that camaraderie that we have in achieving the common goal together. So we're looking for climbers who have an excellent attitude, a strong history of being a good teammate on expeditions, taking care of themselves, taking care of other people, being situationally aware as to what's around them and how their actions might impact other members of their team and other teams on the mountain. We want to know that you're going to be a positive contribution to the group. So when it's day 7 out of 14, sitting at 14K camp, you're one of those people out there building snowman, laughing, having a good time, and not just grumbling in your tent. So those are kind of the 4 key things that we look for: experience at altitude, having the technical skills, fitness and self-care, and then having a team player mentality. So obviously there's a lot of different ways to check those boxes leading up to Denali. We like to see everybody have a multi-day mountaineering training course under your belt. Something like our Mount Baker 5-day Alpine Academy is a great place to start. After that, we're really looking for that time on snow. So how many expeditions have you been on? Was there snow? Were you using crampons? How did it go? So expeditions that kind of can tick those boxes. Vinson, you've got a lot of time on snow. You're pulling a sled just like you would on Denali. You're using fixed lines. You're setting up your tent at every camp. We really like Aconcagua, not necessarily for the technical ability that you find there, because it's very different than Denali, but we like it for the altitude and that test of fitness and self-care. Aconcagua is a long time on expedition. How well did you take care of yourself? How did you feel on day 3? Were you using porters to carry your stuff, or were you able to haul all of your own stuff up the mountain? So those are both great mountains to kind of have in your progression. And then Denali, in terms of the entire 7 summits, is a little bit of a funny one. It's both a really great shakeout before Everest to see how you do in the cold, long expeditions pulling heavy sleds. And it's also a really great expedition to do just after Everest. I'm sure if you've chatted with Carolyn, she loves to see climbers who are going from Everest right on to Denali. You're never going to have more red blood cells. You're never going to be as ready as you were going to be after Everest. So it's also a great next step after Everest if you can get all that time off work, which obviously that's where it comes in. Progressions are different for everybody, and what works best for Bob might not work best for me, might not work best for Stephanie, and so on.
Awesome, Dani. Folks, you're going to see that a lot of what Dani just went through actually really does mirror that readiness test. We have it broken down into really similar sections, really similar thought process for you. But any of those climbs that Dani has just mentioned, Alpine Academies, Aconcagua, Vinson, of course, we have our Everest program. We do all those climbs, and they're absolutely part of the progression you can add in. So we're going to actually get into the logistics of what this looks like to climb. So we're going to talk about our expedition style and philosophy. This is one more that Dani is going to walk us through a little bit here. She spent a lot of time in Talkeetna, really knows what happens in Anchorage and all that stuff. So Dani, I'm going to be turning this back over to you to talk a little bit about our expedition style on Denali and how it looks once you're really starting this expedition.
Yeah, so let's kind of start beginning of the expedition here. You're going to fly in and out of Anchorage, Alaska. We stay in Anchorage before the climb, and the hotel that we stay at's got a shuttle, so it's really easy to take the shuttle from the airport right on over to the hotel, where you're going to meet Dallas or your other guides for the climb. Kind of one of the things that we really like about staying in Anchorage and starting our expedition there as opposed to Talkeetna is the fact that there are stores in Anchorage. We can go to the grocery store, we can go to REI, we can go to the mountaineering shop there and get any last minute items we need. Once you're up in Talkeetna, there's a general store that sells, I don't know, potatoes, carrots, and beer. And then there's a bigger grocery store about 12 miles outside of town. So there just isn't that much ability to source extra gear if somebody's lost a bag or forgotten a send or anything like that. So meeting in Anchorage allows us to get those last minute items that we might need, make sure that everybody's ready and has everything before we make the drive up to Talkeetna. So you'll have one full day in Anchorage with your guides. You'll do a gear check, a team dinner. You'll talk through the entire climb like Dallas is going to do for us here in a second and make sure everybody's prepared. Kind of that next day, you'll drive all the way up to Talkeetna. It's about a 2-hour drive up there, and you'll roll into this very small town that has quite a lot of climbers this time of year when you're going to be there for Denali. When you get into the Talkeetna, you're going to go over to the National Park Service and you're going to do, well, they're going to do a briefing with you, let you know all things about the climb, tell you current conditions. They've just been up there. They can answer some of your questions that you might have as well. They're also going to issue you clean mountain cans, CMCs, that you're going to use to put all of your human waste in throughout the climb. So you get to pick those up. And then from there, you're heading on over to Talkeetna Air Taxi, our amazing air taxi service that's going to fly you into base camp over on the Kahiltna Glacier. One thing that I think I really like, and I know Dallas really likes as we've talked about it, is our smaller team size and our high ratio. All of our teams are 6 climbers to 3 guides, or a 2-to-1 ratio. What this means for you is you get more one-on-one attention from your guides. You get more coaching from your guides, more of those little tips and tricks that make your expedition better. With a smaller team, you get to know everybody really well. You get to form that kind of family team bond, and you can all be hugging on the summit like that story that Dallas shared. So we've got that 6-to-3 ratio for all of our Denali climbs.
I would just emphasize the smaller team. Every guide I talk to on the mountain is envious of the fact that we are 2-to-1 and that we're at 6-to-3, so teams of 9 rather than the standard team of 12. It gives us more flexibility. It's just much more of a cohesive unit. A lot of fun to work with. I definitely appreciate that.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think that's a great nod right there to what we really prioritize here at CTSS and the difference of really putting safety and success at the forefront of all we do. I will add, speaking of teamwork, we actually have partners out of Alaska that we work with on this trip. You've already cruised over to a website. Maybe you've seen it, but we like to share this with people. And we actually kind of pass you off at one point or another and introduce you to our partner. And so get excited to meet other people up there beyond the National Park Rangers. But our Denali program is run in collaboration and in coordination with a partner out of Talkeetna who run the logistics and are actually on the ground doing the setup in Alaska. Our guides are CTSS guides like Dallas, and our climbing teams are made up of vetted CTSS climbers as well. So we work with this operator because they have the logistical CAU, that's a commercial use authorization to operate within the bounds of Denali parks. National parks are special and they require a whole lot of logistics, a whole lot of paperwork to be permitted to operate within. And so we have to follow those rules set out by the National Park Service. And we have a wonderful partner out of there as well. And then there's one question that I think I want to ask about the fatigue on Denali in comparison to the fatigue on Aconcagua to reach the summit.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. It's actually a really good segue into what we're just about to talk about with the route as a whole. What I can say is with many of my climbers having also been on Aconcagua before Denali, overall, their general sentiment is Denali is physically more challenging because of when you're asking, like, is it just a single hard push? I'm like, every day is a hard push. There's not a single day on Denali other than like a weather day where I'm like not super tired at the end of it. A lot of that has to do not just with the altitude, the length, but the heavy weights that we carry. Sometimes you hear us refer to Denali as a very blue collar mountain. It is physical. It is down and dirty. You carry heavy loads, you shovel lots of snow, and this is the whole team, not just the guides. So I would say be ready for day in, day out of really tough days. You know, we always tell people to come in with being in the best shape of their lives, but this is definitely one of those places you want to do that. And it ties in. I think you'll see that sort of illustrated right here as we sort of like walk through. So we're going to just take a second to kind of break down the trip as a whole, to maybe give you a little understanding about how you can approach each of the different sections. And it may even give you some ideas of how you may train differently. So as Dani mentioned, one of the cool things that we start with is actually a flight from Talkeetna to base camp. And that like 30 to 40 minute flight is like worth the entire trip. It is super fun. And then he also mentioned like you can walk to base camp. I think anybody who makes it to base camp in a week is an Olympic athlete. It is so far back in there and you would be crossing some of the most rugged remote terrain on the planet. So it's kind of a unique thing. It's more like Vincent in that regard where you step off the plane on the glacier. And as soon as that plane flies away, you immediately recognize how remote you are. You're not even on the main fork of the Kluberton glacier, but you're surrounded by these humongous walls. There's a rock buttress right next to you that is twice the size of El Capitan in Yosemite National Park. So it is just absolutely spectacular. When I think about the route as a whole, I kind of break it up into two different sections. There's the lower glacier or the lower mountain and the upper mountain. And I kind of make that break somewhere around the 14,000 foot camp. But on the lower mountain, we're really focusing on glacier travel. That's basically what you're doing. This is where you're hauling those sleds. This is where you have those really heavy backpacks. I didn't really mention this earlier, but I would say overall, on average, most of our climbers are carrying between their sled and their backpack initially around 100 pounds of food and gear. That's a lot. I mean, that is a lot of weight, no matter how you shake it. Once we get to the upper mountain, basically above about the 14,000 foot camp, this is where it feels a lot more like climbing. We've got our ice axes out, we're in crampons. The mountain's much steeper up there, and so we're really getting more into what feels more like our classic climbing. But we've got to get all the way from base camp to that upper mountain section. That 14,000 foot camp is a pretty major place on the mountain. A lot of climbers wind up congregating there because you can push worse weather lower on the mountain, and you just cannot suffer bad weather higher. So this is a pretty big spot on the hill, and you get to bump into a lot of other teams, maybe other climbers that you've seen on peaks around the world before. The Rangers also have a kind of a permanent campsite there, which is really great. And that allows some higher level medical care to be offered at the 14,000 foot camp that we can't get other places. So even though we are really remote, the Rangers do have a Ranger station would be a big stretch. It's a collection of tents, but there is a little bit more of a presence there at the 14,000 foot camp. We then actually move all the way up to a 17,000 foot camp, and that's where we launch our summit bids from. And ultimately, we're going all the way up to the top there that, like we mentioned, about 6,190 meters or 20,310 feet. So that summit day, you're still looking at like 12 plus hours on your feet of travel at really high altitudes, of altitudes that very much compare to Aconcagua. As Dani mentioned, the elevation feels worse than it is. It typically feels like, and we can't put a hard number on it because it changes day to day, but it feels like around 22,000 feet. That's what the estimates generally say. So that's a pretty substantial difference for you. So it's a big day too. It hurts for sure. And when people get done, we're all tired. So let's look at the itinerary a little bit. This is a reasonably long expedition. Typically, we talk about this thing as being around 25 days door to door. So how does that really all break down? Well, we get into Anchorage earlier. And as they were mentioning, we actually meet in Anchorage. And there's a lot of real benefits to that. When you arrive in Anchorage, you catch a shuttle to the hotel, and then the guides come over to the hotel the next morning, and we sit down, and the very first thing we do is we have a big team meeting. We talk about our philosophy, we talk about our plan, we meet each other, we talk about teamwork, and then we go do gear checks, just like you would do on any other expedition. And that gives us an opportunity, because we're in Anchorage, if we're missing something, we can go get it. If you get to Talkeetna and you don't have it, probably ain't finding it. Once we drive to Talkeetna, the goal is to drive drive to Talkeetna, have our ranger briefing, and fly all in the same day. It's a pretty action-packed day. We can have weather delays there. So sometimes you wind up hanging out in Talkeetna a little longer if the weather doesn't play out in your favor. But most of the time, most of my expeditions, I've been able to fly on right then and there. From there, it's a series of progressions, which we'll walk through in a little more detail, of climbing between camps. And like you do on a lot of other high peaks, it's not infrequent for us to climb up a ways, leave some gear that we don't need, come back down, sleep, and then climb past that the next day. And so what we do is we call that climb high, sleep low. So we're kind of like yo-yoing our way up the mountain as a way to help our bodies begin to build red blood cells or acclimate. And so we do that between camps 1 and 2, and 2 and 3, and 3 and 4. And then from 4 up is the summit. Each of these kind of bounces, we have an itinerary, but as we mentioned earlier, ultimately, weather's the big dictator on the mountain. So we have what is a little more unique with Denali is we also have a bunch of contingency days built in. The way I kind of frame it to make my head kind of like wrap around it is we think about 21 days, 3 weeks on the snow. That's what we're trying to do from our initial fly on day to our fly off day. It's about 21 days. Can you do it in less? Yes. If we didn't use any contingency days, you would do it in less. Just go ahead and mentally expect to use every last one of them and you won't be disappointed. If you go in thinking we're going to do it in the minimum, you're going to be surprised. So let's take a look at each of these sections of the route one by one, kind of break down some of these sections. So as we mentioned, you fly, you land right in the middle of the glacier. You land at base camp at about 7,000 feet. And the first thing you do actually is go downhill. It kind of feels awful because you're like, I'm here to go climbing and you're going to make me go down. And I mean, right out of the gate, you're going downhill. You lose about 250 meters, 700 feet, something like that, to go down and gain the main Kahiltna Glacier. That slope is called Heartbreak Hill. It's not a heartbreak when you're going down it. Just remember Heartbreak Hill when you have to come back. It's the very last thing you do to end the climb, hence its name. We get it all the way to Camp 1. The difference in elevation between Kahiltna Base Camp and Camp 1, there's hardly any elevation gain that day, but you drop down Heartbreak Hill and you have to regain all that elevation to get to Camp 1. So it's mainly really long, flat glacier travel, but you're in the middle of this humongous glacier surrounded by some of the biggest peaks on the planet, and you will feel every bit of the remoteness to it. Camp 1, or Ski Hill Camp, sits right at the base of Ski Hill. This is the first slope, and I use that term loosely. It seems steep the first time you go up it, but by the time you get done, you realize that was probably the gentlest thing you did the entire trip. We climb up Ski Hill, go all the way up to Kahiltna Pass. This is what separates the north side of the Alaska Range from the south side. So everything on the other side of Kahiltna Pass drains out towards Fairbanks. Everything on the south side drains back towards Anchorage. And then we turn up and we go up to Camp 2, which is at 11,000 feet. Kahiltna Pass and Camp 2 are the snowiest places on the mountain. When storms come in, these areas get feet and feet and feet of snow. Through this entire section down here below Camp 2, we're typically on snowshoes. We're typically dragging sleds, and this is where you're going to see the heaviest loads of the trip. So even though we aren't climbing in really steep terrain, even though we might not be gaining a lot of elevation between each camp, these are really physical days purely because of the weight. We have all 21 days of food, fuel, and gear on our backs or in our sleds. So these are some really challenging days for people. And this is where all that dragging the big tire around the block really comes back to pay dividends. So from above 11,000 feet, we finally start to get into a little bit more climbing. Right out of 11,000 foot camp is a feature that everybody calls Motorcycle Hill. And this is the first big test of the whole trip. As we turn and go up Motorcycle Hill right out of camp, it's steep and unrelenting for a little over an hour of climbing as we work our way up this first really big steep objective. As we wind our way around above Motorcycle Hill, we eventually get past a spot called Windy Corner. Windy Corner is a really big landmark in the entire Denali climb. It is very aptly named, oftentimes as advertised. It is a windy, cold spot. And so this is one of those places where, again, like the weather runs the mountain. Even if it is a beautifully clear sky day, if it is really windy, we can't make our way around Windy Corner because it's often very icy. There's big gaping crevasses below us, and it's generally very cold. So this is not a place that we can afford any air. After we round Windy Corner, we get out into the 14 camp base. And I always tell all my climbers, like as soon as you round that corner, you're about to see the coolest view of your life because the 14 camp basin is spectacular. Camp 3 or 14,000 foot camp sits right where you think it would, right around 14,000 feet in the middle of this big glacier cirque. The walls around you rise for nearly 2,000 meters, 6,000 feet of sheer rock and ice, leading almost directly to the summit. Once we get above 14,000 feet, I mentioned that this is what we typically refer to as the upper mountain. This is where it really feels like climbing. Now we're crampons, ice axe. We work our way up and we get on the fixed lines. The fixed lines on Denali are not like the fixed lines in the Himalaya. They don't run from bottom to top. They only run for a very small section of the mountain, around 1,000 feet or 300 meters. And it's just the upper section of this that gets us right up onto the true West Buttress. The West Buttress being the name of the route we're climbing. So we use these fixed lines to travel across the steepest slopes. The steep slopes there are around 45 to 50 degrees. For those of you who are skiers, this is like full double black diamond ski territory, right? This is super steep and often very icy. If in your brain you're thinking 45 degrees doesn't sound that steep, I guarantee you it is. We're also doing this with quite a bit of weight on our packs, again, because now we are definitely not dragging sleds up these 45 and 50 degree icy slopes. Above that, we get onto the 16 Ridge. The 16 Ridge offers maybe several of the most beautiful hours of climbing you will ever do in your mountaineering careers. Right behind the photo on this is the 16 Ridge. It is absolutely spectacular. On one side, it drops 1,000 meters or 3,000 feet right down to 14 Camp. On the other, it drops around 2,000 meters or 6,000 feet down onto the Peters Glacier. In sections, it is a full knife edge ridge. It is gorgeous. And it connects the top of the fixed lines all the way to our high camp, Camp 4 at 17,000 feet. I think for all the guides, that's our favorite section of the whole climb, without a doubt. But we're not done yet. Even though we did the most beautiful 2 hours of climbing, we still have the summit day. And summit day starts out of that 17,000 foot camp. Now, unlike many other mountains you go on, we're in no rush to alpine start because we're in Alaska and it's June. It's daylight nearly 24 hours a day. So there's no, we need to be back by nightfall because there is no nightfall. So we typically have a nice leisurely start to our mornings and we may not start climbing till 8, 9, even 10 o'clock to make sure we're climbing during some of the warmer sections of the day because Denali, the upper mountain in particular, is known for being brutally cold. 25 degrees below Fahrenheit, 30 degrees below Celsius is not uncommon. And if you add into that any wind chill, it's spectacularly cold. The first thing we do is we cross an area called the Autobahn, a long ascending traverse immediately right out of camp. By the end of it, you've gained 1,000 feet and you're sitting at Denali Pass between the north and south summits of Denali. But you're not done. In fact, you've only done the first step. We wind up and around Zebra Rocks, across by Archdeacon's Tower and onto the football field. At this point, you're at over 19,000 feet and you enter this pancake flat expanse. And as you walk across it, you swear you're on a treadmill not moving because the summit doesn't seem to be getting any closer. On the other side of the football field is Pig Hill. I did kind of laugh with my team this year. Any hill that gets a name on Denali, you should just immediately be like, oh, that's not good for me. Pig Hill takes about an hour to ascend up to the final summit ridge. And then again, the summit ridge weaves its way around these massive cornices the size of houses all the way to the tippy top of North America at 20,310 feet. These days are often spectacular. If you're on the summit ridge, we're up there because the weather's good. We're not pushing bad weather up here because you just can't. You're too remote. At this point, we're giving those big team hugs. We're high-fiving. And then, of course, we have to reverse the entire thing all the way back down. While we may have taken 18 days to get to the top, we typically descend in about 2. So even the descent of Denali is one of the hardest things that we'll do because we're moving all of that gear and all of those people all the way back down the mountain. Even our poop, we're carrying off the mountain. So everything we brought on, everything goes back with us too. Nothing gets flown off or on unless it's at base camp. So these are really big days, but they're also incredibly rewarding with some of the most stunning views of anything around. One more piece when we're at the summit, we mentioned that it sits in the heart of the 600-mile-long Alaska range. While it sits in the middle of the range, it's unlike a lot of the other really big peaks in that it's not just taller than its neighbors, it dwarfs its neighbors. Other than Mount Foraker, which you can actually see right over Stephanie's shoulder there, Foraker is 17,000 feet. Other than that, most of the peaks that it is surrounded by are half the height of Denali. So it is massive in comparison. In fact, Dani's picture picture behind her is better representation of Denali. That's staring right at the Alaska range, and you can see no other peaks other than the Great One. So you are so far above everything else. It's a really cool perspective. And even though there are higher peaks on the planet, you definitely feel like you're on top of the world.
Awesome, Dallas. You made me chuckle with calling out that if there's a named section, it's going to be hard. As I was actually putting these pins on the map and looking at them, I was absolutely zooming in on my own Gaia and like, that looks intense. That looks hard. Wonder why he named it that. So I really appreciate all of that. What is the snow like on Denali? Is it slushy? Is it wet? Is it heavy? Is it dry? Does it change from upper, lower mountain?
Yeah, great question. You get a little bit of everything for sure. And there'll be, because you're out there for potentially 3 weeks, it's going to change a lot over the course of those 3 weeks. And then lastly, every year is different. The upper mountain is very, very cold, very, 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 very dry. The lower Kahiltna Glacier can get very spring-like, very slushy.
Yep.
So you can get everything in between all on one trip for sure.
Perfect. That makes sense. And then how does the fixed line section on Denali compare to the steepness and fixed line section on Vinson?
Haven't done Vinson. You're probably picking up a lot of these the things we climb during our winter. I am an avalanche forecaster for the other part of the year, so my focus is on skiing through our winter months. But again, lots of folks on Vinson that are on Denali with me. Longer, steeper, heavier packs.
Perfect. Where on the route is there significant exposure, and what does protection look like on those exposed sections?
So when you're talking exposure there, we're mainly talking about like a risk of a fall. There's still a lot of things we can be exposed to, serac coming down on top of us, avalanches, those kind of things. The fixed lines and 16 Ridge are by far the most exposed sections, with some others on Summit Day, the Autobahn, Zebra Rocks, the Summit Ridge. There's 2 sections of fixed lines. So this is the main one that we pointed out. There's another shorter section around a landmark known as Washburn's Thumb. We also use a lot of running protection. These are big stakes of metal, pickets that we hammer into the snow and ice, and we clip the ropes between the climbers on the rope team. If you haven't used running protection and you haven't used fixed lines, don't fret too much. We definitely do a lot of training. Even though this is a peak where we expect people to come in with skill sets, we're not just going to assume you know how to do these things. Especially on my trips, we do a lot of training at each of these camps during our rest days. And that gives us the opportunity to make sure we polish these things before we get into those really exposed situations.
Awesome. When you're thinking about cords and gear and kind of getting set up for that, do you go ahead and do all of that before you arrive in Anchorage? Or is there time once you're in Anchorage to get everything set up, like attaching your ascender, your chest harness, getting your safety prusik ready as well? How does that work actually once you're on the ground in Anchorage, and what's expected?
What I would say is definitely lean on the gear list. If it's on the gear list, bring that with you, and we will deal with all of it either in Anchorage or with some of it to keep from being like information overload. We may just say, hey, pack this, and we'll deal with it on the mountain. The key is making sure we have the things on the gear list, that when we do the gear checks in Anchorage, we check those things off, that you bring all that with you. We will either deal with it in Anchorage or on the mountain, but we won't suddenly tell you, hey, you've got to use that ascender, let's go. We'll definitely make sure it's rigged correctly and do some training with you before you have to deal with it.
Dani, and you probably know this too, Dallas, nobody's required to bring their own ropes. It's going to be more cordage, webbing, stuff like that.
Correct.
So we're now going to switch gears a little bit away from the itinerary and the route, but let's talk about getting ready mentally and physically for the great one, Denali. So Dani, can you walk us through what it looks like to get yourself prepared?
Yeah, absolutely. With Dallas having just walked us through the route, hopefully you all have a great feel about how big Denali is and how you're doing not just one hard day, not just 2 hard days, but a hard day every day for the entire time that you're on the mountain. There's big back-to-back days, and while we do have rest days and they exist, you need to be prepared to continually push yourself and perform at a high level, whether it's a nice sunny day or it's storming and winds blowing in your face. You need to have the fitness and kind of that positive mental attitude to keep on going. One thing I know Dallas and I touched on this when we talked about how unique Denali is and how different it is there's no support. There's nobody running ahead and pre-building camp for you. Nobody's making your tent platform level so your feet aren't above your head. You not only need to have the energy to get to camp, but then you need to build camp once you get there, which depending on the weather conditions and the snow conditions like Dallas was talking about, ranges everywhere from making sure that your tent platform is flat before you actually set up your tent and then building snow walls around your tent in order to protect it from weather that may come. So we're looking at huge back-to-back days. And as Dallas said, usually you're carrying around 100 pounds of gear between your sled and your backpack. Dallas gave us the insight on guides packs are usually between 120, 130 pounds. And Dallas said he even carries up to 150 pounds some years on Denali. So as we look about preparing for this physically, we need to be ready to carry big loads on back-to-back days. A lot of our climbers ask, oh, what can I do in the gym to help me prepare? What can I do down in Florida to help me prepare? Oh, I live up in Colorado. I'm hiking 14ers. Obviously, we all live in different places all over the world and have different access to things. One of the most important things that we can be doing is putting on our backpack with all of our gear in it, maybe even some added weight, and going out and hiking and doing the activity that we're training to do. You know, you look at Olympic level athletes, whether they're ice skating, figure skating, whether they're running marathons, whether they're doing the half pipe in the Winter Olympics, all of them are not only training in the gym, but they're also sport specific training. So they're doing the sport in training for that. Now, what does that look like in Florida? For those of you who are down there, maybe you don't have snow, obviously. You can't just put on a sled and go for a nice wintry hike. Many of our climbers who live in places where you can't just pull a sled, pull tires around, whether it's on the beach or down your neighborhood and it's 6 a.m. and all your neighbors are drinking their coffee, looking out their windows, wondering what the heck you're doing out there. Well, you're training for Denali. You're pulling that tire, you're pulling that sled with weight in it, and you're getting your body ready to kind of carry that weight, but in a different way than that's on your back. So doing big days, carrying that pack, pulling that sled, and then doing bigger back-to-back days. Obviously, a lot of us work Monday through Friday. So, tailoring your schedule so that you're doing bigger back-to-back days on Saturday and Sunday, and then you're recovering while you're sitting at your desk at work there on Monday. All of those things are really important in the physical preparation. And I think a lot of the times what we forget is the mental preparation for the climb. We're in a really big, really remote area. As Dallas said, as soon as that plane takes off after you get dropped off at base camp, you suddenly realize that you're really out there and you're relying on yourself and your team members for the rest of the climb. So having that mindset, preparing yourself, visualizing the route and the climb and what it's going to be like, thinking about how you're going to respond when, you're on that 16K ridge and it just drops off on either side of you, and making sure that you're mentally prepared to handle that is all really important. As well as having a great mindset about the downtime that you're going to have on the expedition. 14 days at 14K camp like Dallas had last year. Having that mindset of being present, being in the moment, being so grateful to be able to be in that moment of time and making the best out of it, whether it's making snow angels, cooking good food, hanging out together, helping other teams set up their tents, making sure, you're keeping yourself busy and having that positive mindset, as well as being, mentally ready to live in a group, in a team for 20 days. Obviously, that brings challenge of its own if your teammate's snoring in your tent, if somebody else is annoying you, just being ready to have open and honest conversations with other people about where you're at, about where they're at, and how you guys can come together and work together as a team to climb the mountain together. So we've got a great training webinar that we did a couple months ago with Mark Postal from Evoke Endurance that talks all things training and how to prepare for mountains like Denali and Everest and Aconcagua, Baker, and everything in between.
Awesome. Yes. I also put our mindset webinar we did with an Olympic sports therapist and Alan Arnett as well. And Caroline Pemberton, our co-owner, was there too. And that was just a wealth of really good information about mindset training and really how to prepare mentally for expeditions like this. So I think that is really awesome. Folks, let's move on a little bit. I want to ask, outside of weather, outside of avalanches and things like that happening, what is the most common reason you see for climbers having to spin and turn around, whether it's the whole team or an individual climber?
Yeah, so I kind of look at three categories. Dani actually referenced a lot of these earlier in getting prepared for Denali as well. There's obviously fitness is a really big one that people just aren't ready for it. Two is skill. I actually think oftentimes folks will look at guides and they're like, oh, y'all are so strong. If you meet me in person, you will be like, wow, that dude's really scrawny. We're not really strong. We just have really good technique. So fitness is one. Technique is a big one. Even really small people with good technique can way out climb and outperform people who spend a ton of time in the gym. And then lastly is being a good teammate. Those are really the three things that cause people to turn around. They're not fit, they don't have the skill, or they're just not being a good teammate. And all three of those things really also play together quite a bit.
Okay, awesome. And then Dallas, as we move on to gear, because I know Danny's going to talk about this, the setup with the tents, what's the ratio of human beings in a tent? How big of a tent do you bring up?
Yeah, it's a good question. It really depends. It will vary. Most of the time, what we do is we use 4-person tents and we put 3 people in them. So there's a lot of space for you and your gear. The main reason for that is weight. However, sometimes we use 3-person tents and we put 2 people in them. It really just depends on the team and how things are looking. But overall, we're trying to reduce the weight, and it's warmer if you put 3 people in a 4-person tent.
Perfect. So we are going to transition over to gear essentials. And I want to draw attention to one question that Dallas already answered about avalanches, which you're going to see the very first bullet point on here is that in 2026, avalanche transceivers are now required. So I'm going to let Danny talk about this. Dallas can chime in too.
Yeah, so as Stephanie said, in 2026, we will be requiring all of our climbers to carry an avalanche transceiver. We do have them available for rent. While this might be a main part of Dallas's kit as he works as an avalanche forecaster every year, we realize that not everybody has one. So we will have those available for rent. Dallas, I do want to turn it over to you just for a second if you want to talk about why we're requiring them in 2026.
Yeah, I think ultimately the operator we're working with in Alaska, they determined that they feel like there's really no reason not to. These things have come such a long way. They're really small. They're relatively lightweight. It's just one more piece of safety. It feels like one of those things that feels like a no-brainer that we should just be wearing these things. And I would say, I mentioned this when I answered the other question, but last year we actually didn't summit because of avalanche hazard. And even if we had had transceivers, that would not have changed a thing. But it did feel like we were in this moment where we had very real avalanche hazard, and we didn't have this tool in case something happened that we were not expecting. It's a really easy one, and like Danny said, we can rent them, so it's pretty easy to help.
So let's jump into some more gear here. Next on our list, we've got triple boots versus double boots with an over boot. Talking to Dallas, he sees a lot of climbers on the mountain these days wearing triple boots because they're so versatile. It's easy to wear them on Everest, on Vinson, on Aconcagua, and also bring them to Denali. That being said, on the lower glacier, Dallas was talking about how sometimes they flip their schedules and they travel at night because it's so hot. Triple boots can be extremely warm lower on the glacier, but do provide excellent warmth higher on the mountain, as those temperatures start to drop. So both are great options for Denali. I think given a choice, I know a lot of our guides are choosing double boots with over boots as opposed to triple boots. But a lot of our guides also guide all over the world and have one boot of every single kind in their gear closets and have the ability to choose that double boot instead of that triple boot. So both will work great. And what works really well for Dallas, having every boot available, might be different than any of the rest of us. After that, let's kind of talk about pee funnels quick for women. Obviously, there's no trees on Denali. You're not running behind a tree to go pee quick and then running back over and clipping into your rope team. You got to stay with that rope team, and generally there's not many places to hide while you use the bathroom. So having a pee funnel can be absolutely great for that, allowing you to use the bathroom a little bit more privately than just fully dropping trow there on the glacier. I know Stephanie and Megan Buchanan and I wrote a really awesome blog post about using the bathroom on Everest specifically, and Megan tells a really great story, I think, from when she was on Denali about how in order to get her comfortable with her pee funnel, her guide would just announce to the group that, hey, Megan's going to use this pee funnel, and over here, if everybody could look the other way. And so normalizing that within the group, everybody's got to go to the bathroom one way or the other. And so just being open and honest about it with your guides and the other people on your team, and then practice makes perfect. The more you can practice with that pee funnel at home and before your climb, the better you're going to be able to use it on the climb. That kind of brings us perfectly into waste management. I talked about getting those CMCs or clean mountain cans from the Park Service when you get into Talkeetna. You're going to be bringing those up and down the mountain with you, using them to go to the bathroom in, poop in specifically. Only solid waste will go in there. You're going to cache them at camps. You're going to dig them back up on your way down, and you're going to fly them off. So while you don't have to bring that as a piece of your gear, it is a really key piece of gear that the Park Service provides for us on the mountain to make sure that we're keeping it clean. Kind of the next point here is a really interesting point. We hear Denali is really cold. There's risk of frostbite. There's really big storms. Am I going to be warm enough? While all of that is true, 8,000 meter suits are overkill for Denali. You are going to be sweating. There's a lot to manage there. You can't easily, unzip and take your coat off. Instead, the whole thing is connected on your body, and there's really no way for it to breathe. And we all know that once you start sweating, it's really easy for that sweat to freeze on your body and for you to get really cold really quickly. So we leave those 8,000 meter suits at home. Instead we're bringing a big parka and big down pants that give us more versatility to change our layers as we're heating up while we're doing all of that effort, moving up to 17 camp, moving up to the summit, and then being able to put those jackets and layers on when we're at camp, when we're at our breaks, when we're standing on the summit and things like that. We talked a little bit about ropes earlier. Obviously, we will be providing the ropes for you. We're also providing the sleds. You don't need to bring your own sled from home. We have those there, and we'll provide those for you. Kind of coming to the end here, if anybody watched our gear webinar back in, I don't even know, April or May, Josh McDowell and I talked a lot about gear for all of our mountains. And I think I said it one too many times on there, but ounces make pounds. Every little thing that you bring on Denali, you're going to have to carry all the way up to 17 camp and all the way back down. So everywhere that you can shave a couple ounces here, a couple ounces there, leave that extra base layer top at home and just bring one or two. You're all going to smell anyways. It doesn't matter. But ounces make pounds. Anywhere you can save some of that weight on the mountain will really count in keeping your pack and sled lighter from the get-go.
I think that I'll again just reinforce your last statement. Ounces make pounds. So be really judicious, and you can always bring it to Anchorage and ask the guide, and then the guide will tell you to leave it in Anchorage. So if you're ever in doubt, bring it to Anchorage, and we can have a conversation before we go on the mountain.
Great advice. Bring it and decide what you're going to bring and officially not bring. And so we're going to start wrapping things up. So get into any final questions as Dallas and Dani get ready for their last pieces of advice. But I want to really quickly talk to you about the CTSS philosophy. You've been hearing a little bit of little nuggets of this that we select the team, we vet everyone, things like that. But we haven't really shared with you what do we value at CTSS. So I want to make sure that we share that. Here at Climbing the Seven Summits, everything starts with our expert leadership and our world-class guides. We are the Seven Summits specialists, and we're also progression specialists. As Dani mentioned, we customize and tailor those recommendations and what we suggest for progression to you, your budget, your style, your timeline, and things like that. Our top priorities are always safety and success, and always in that order. We are highly selective of who we climb with and the guides we work with. If something doesn't go right, doesn't go well, you're not a good fit, that's okay. We can go find somebody else, or you can climb with a different team. Our marginal gains philosophy is really one of our core tenets. That means we focus on little small details that add up into really big results. It means that we're going to have better quality food. We want to make sure you're taken care of. We don't want to just get by and scrape by. We want you to be at the top so you can feel good on the mountain. And as I alluded to here, us being highly selective, we do ask all of our climbers and even all of our guides to look at and sign our lovingly called no dickheads policy, because great teammates really do make great climbs. This is no joke, guys. We actually have you legitimately sign this, and it is that is what it is called. So we're really crystal clear that humility is super important in everything we do. So we recognize that summiting some of the world's most mightiest, biggest peaks, just like Denali, requires more than just physical fitness. It requires your mental strength, your commitment to what you're doing, and also that deep humility for the land, the people that are around you, and the team that you're on, and of course yourself. So I just wanted to share a little bit of that so you know who we are and how we're vetting our climbers and our guides and all of our logistics that we work with. And then last but not least, I do want to share with you how to connect with us, but I will put in this Calendly link right here. If you're interested in talking about your climbing progression, what's next, Denali itself, or maybe something else, even Baker, if you're just getting started, schedule a call with Caroline because she will happily jump on Zoom with you and talk through what is best for you and what we might recommend. So Dallas and Dani, it is time for final thoughts from both of you. Dani, let's go you first, and then we're going to wrap things up with Dallas.
I think my final thoughts on Denali are it's big, it's remote, it's unique, and it's absolutely incredible. I think everybody who, is doing the 7 summits is looking forward to Denali as one of the most unique mountains we climb out there. And really, I think when you're on the mountain, be present, enjoy the fact that you're out there, enjoy the fact that you're relying on your team, build that really strong team. And don't forget to train hard and that ounces make pounds. Reduce your load as much as you can and set yourself up for success.
A lot of my final thoughts are very similar to Dani's. I think this is just such a spectacular mountain to go climb. That's why I go back year after year after year. The remoteness, the teamwork, just its position within the range. It is a real challenge. And because it's such a real challenge, it brings such rewarding feelings and experiences of whether or not you make it all the way to the top on their first try or not. It is always a mountain that I tell stories about over and over and over because it's so spectacular. You will not be disappointed in going to Denali.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, Dani and Dallas, on behalf of all of us that were here today, we just want to say thank you for sharing this time with us and sharing your expertise. It means a lot to us. And on behalf of Climbing the 7 Summits, of course, Dani, you're on the logistics team. You're here every day, but thank you for doing this. And Dallas, as always, thank you for being one of our world-class guides because you make this all possible. But folks, again, thank you for coming, and I hope you keep enjoying your days wherever you are. If you need anything, don't hesitate to reach out to myself or to Dani or to just drop a message through Contact Us, and we'll help you out. I think that's all from here, and hopefully we'll see you in our next webinar. All right, folks, take care, and thank you all. Bye.